Welcome back to the Solid Verbal, boys and girls. My name's Ty Hildebrandt. As always, that fine gentleman over there, still in the heart of the Midwest, though I don't know if it is currently flurrying as it was on our last
Oh, it's fine. It's a little chilly. We're all good.
podcast recording. Dan Rubenstein, welcome back, sir. How goes it?
Good. It's good. I'm getting a haircut here shortly, which is desperately needed, which apparently your mom noticed.
My mom called it out. Yeah,
Thanks, Mom H.
she asked me if you were going for a new hair situation, growing it out. And I said, I don't think so. I talk to Dan every day, but alas.
No. So no, everything is great. And you know, as soon as everything seems sort of quiet as we head to spring ball and we're reminiscing about, T. Higgins. That's a tie-in, by the way.
Yeah.
We're reminiscing about the 4-team playoff. We're doing a State of the Union. We're having lots of fun. Boom. Clemson sues its own conference.
Well, here.
Yeah.
And this is truly breaking news.
Beep, 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 beep.
Yeah, news breaks. We're recording this on Wednesday. It breaks on Tuesday morning that Clemson is filing a lawsuit over exorbitant exit fees over the grant of rights against the ACC. So this is not, I repeat, not a statement of, a declaration of Clemson is trying to leave the conference.
Sure.
I think that's the subtext. We know that this is eventually where this could head.
If you went to the solid wife, Kate, and said, look, I don't want a divorce, but in the event, should we start talking assets? Or she probably wouldn't take that as like things are going well.
Right. We're not interpreting this lawsuit as a sign that everything is just honky-dory between Clemson and the ACC and furthermore, Florida State and the ACC. There's a lot going on beneath the surface here. But at least within the context of this lawsuit, Clemson is challenging the validity of some of the language that they signed up for, that they re-upped with as part of their agreement, I guess, back in 2016 that runs through the year 2036. But this is obviously continuing a bit of a trend. Florida State's got its lawsuit working through the system. Clemson is now jumping aboard using some of the same language, going at some of the same points that Florida State is as well. Presumably, they are trying to see what their options are and maybe eventually wind up as a free agent as well. Somewhere else might be a home for the Clemson Tigers. We're going to find out as much as we can from one of the guys who is always breaking Clemson news, Larry Williams from TigerIllustrated.com from the Clemson Dubcast. He will be with us here momentarily to give us a sense.
Boots on the ground, Ty.
Give us a sense for what's going on the ground, man, because this is, like, I guess, the latest story now that we're going to have to follow in the world of conference realignment, media rights, college football tectonic shifts, so on and so forth.
Hey, sorry for the quick interruption, but it'd be incredible if you considered subscribing to the Solid Verbal YouTube channel right down below. Yeah. The latest in, this is part 37 of College Football Bummers, brought to you by the Solid Verbal. No, it's fascinating, obviously, to see how the sausage is made behind the scenes, how the gears and pulleys are trying to operate to position as many of the big places for whatever the future holds for the sport. But yes, it's a long line of like, hey, others are making more money. We don't want to be left behind. We see ourselves on even footing as the SEC and Big Ten. And so we want ours at the expense of the sport. And it's not limited to Clemson and Florida State. They signed a bad deal. They're trying to get out of that bad deal. And you know what happened with USC on the West Coast? It happened with Texas and Oklahoma with the Big 12 and SEC. It's everybody looking out for, financial security for themselves in the long term at the expense of we're not sure yet. At the expense of, maybe people are loading up because they see a future in which schools are going to have more expenses as pay for play sort of looms in the not so distant future, with players saying, look at these billions and billions of dollars, and schools saying, what if all of these wealthy dry cleaners paid you? And that doesn't seem like it's going to be sustainable. So we have all like this mixing of unsustainable business models coming together, and they're all looking at ESPN and Fox to pay the bills, and hopefully ESPN and Fox are okay with all of this sort of chaos and acrimony and wanting to be aligned with it, because obviously college football offers a ton in the way of TV inventory for a long, long time. But yes, we are sort of heading towards a future in which the ACC, if it exists, is going to look very different, in which the sport nationally is going to look very different. This comes on the heels of unequal revenue sharing with the new college football playoff system, that there are certain schools who don't want to be the nicest house on the block, that they'd rather be amongst nice houses. And it doesn't seem like it's long-term great for the sport or is even central to the appeal of the sport. But as things change and things evolve, the worst possible thing you could do would be to stand pat and hope for the best.
Well, that's what the Pac-12 did, right? That's sort of what the Pac-12 did. Didn't work out great for them. And we'll see what comes of all these lawsuits. Larry, as he said, boots on the ground, has covered the Clemson beat for a good long time, is sort of our go-to source for all things Clemson. We'll talk to him momentarily. Before we get into it, 2 bits of housekeeping. I said it on the last episode. I'll say it again. The most important thing you can do for us if you want to support what we're doing, whatever app you're listening to this on right now, hit subscribe, hit follow, whatever the button is it gives you. Sometimes they change from platform to platform. But that's the most important thing. Hit follow, hit subscribe, sign up for more Verbal in your life. We'd appreciate that greatly. If you fashion yourself a bit of a super Verballer, a super fan of what we're doing, you can go on out to verballers.com, VERBALLERS.com. That is our Patreon. We've got a $5 tier, $10 tier. That helps Dan and I more than we can put into words to continue.
And if they're a super duper fan, I guess find Ty's house, stand outside of it,
don't do that.
Hold up a boombox a la Say Anything, and play Peter Gabriel's In Your Eyes on Ty's birthday.
Kate would love that. Oh, I'm
Christmas,
sure she'd love that.
Easter, In Your Eyes. Yeah, I think that would be.
Kate would love that for sure.
Please don't do that.
Don't do that. All right.
Please don't do that.
Without further ado. All right, Dan, joining us now, our good friend from TigerIllustrated.com, of course, the Clemson Dubcast. He is the foremost authority on all things Clemson football. Very pleased to welcome back to the show, Mr. Larry Williams, sir. How goes it?
Going well. And looking at my face, I'm reminded of why my decision to have my own podcast as audio only remains brilliant.
Be kind, be kind. It is great to have you back. We always appreciate your wisdom, however we can get it, audio, video, or both. We wanted to have you back on, obviously, to shed some light on this story that you, among others, broke yesterday. We're recording this on Wednesday, that Clemson is now also suing the ACC. So I guess just to set the stage for people listening to this at home, Florida State's been very outspoken in its opposition to the ACC grant of rights, pretty outspoken about its desire to get out of the ACC altogether. They've already got their own lawsuit that they're working through the system that's challenging the ACC and the grant of rights and the exit fees, so on and so forth. Is it fair to say that Clemson has been supportive of those efforts, though much more quiet about it?
Yes. And that's a fascinating layer to this, is the contrast in the way the two schools have handled this. And not saying that not picking one side as being right or the best way, but I do think that the perceptions that came from, the last year plus, because it goes back, I'm thinking back to last year's spring meetings, when that you go into the spring meetings and Florida State is being very loud about its misgivings with the future in the ACC. And then you fast forward to August when they had their big live stream conference with the Board of Trustees and other administrators. And then you fast forward to December when they actually did the deed. The perceptions that come from that sort of disparity in level of public angst, it created the impression that, Florida State is most enthusiastic most serious about getting out of the ACC, whereas Clemson, which is more buttoned up, is therefore, happier, less, less serious about it, which all along, from the people I talked to at Clemson, I sort of knew and conveyed to my subscribers that, like, look, this is, don't get the wrong idea about Clemson's choice of messaging. They are just as serious, maybe more. And I should point to last August when I guess it was like a 2-week run up to the actual expansion vote. At one point, according to the people I talked to, as they were deliberating behind the scenes and the ACC's, certain ACC schools are trying to get people on board to have the enough of a vote to vote in Stanford and Cal and SMU. At one point, Clemson was the only dissenter through at one point in that process. Of course, Florida State came back around, and of course, North Carolina was also the third dissenter. But the revelation to me, the most fascinating part to me was, it takes guts. It takes some real seriousness in your convictions to stick to your guns on a vote like that. Because you guys know, whether it's a board of trustees or any governing body or NFL or whatever, you want everything to be in public unanimous. Yes, we all agree on this, and you hash out your problems in private. So for Clemson to stay the course on that, a charter member going against the grain, that spoke volumes to me, and it still does. And so I guess getting back to your question, I think now only, as of yesterday, is it truly come into light just among surface level sort of viewers and readers and followers of college football that, oh crap, yeah, Clemson really is serious about this.
So even if there was this undercurrent of seriousness to you, to others who follow the program on to the degree that you do, I think for the rest of us, this news yesterday felt like it came out of left field. It was a surprising bombshell in that I don't know if people saw it coming. We obviously understand why it's happening. Did you have a heads up? Did you have any inkling that this was coming, that there was something going on behind the scenes, or was it as surprising to you as it was the rest of us?
On a specific sort of level of in the moment yesterday, when I first saw it or first heard about it, was it a surprise? Yes. Did I have a heads up on that specific, Tuesday morning, March, whatever? No. In fact, this is wild. The way it came to light to me and to subscribers of our website, somebody on our message board, a subscriber, posted the PDF of the legal filing. And I'm sitting there, and I actually about 10 minutes before that, I had a direct message from another subscriber. It said, Larry, I hope you're not busy today because you're going to have a lot of work to do. And that's all this subscriber said. I had no previous relationship with this subscriber. And of course, it's just a handle. So it's not their name or anything like that.
You don't know who it is. Like, sure. Right.
Can you please just give me a little more clarity here? So in the midst of that, as I'm trying to track that down, I get on my message board and I see the PDF. And a subscriber has basically broken the story on our message board.
That is wild. Wow.
The Clemson files suit. So then as I'm working, and this is inside baseball, but I think a lot of people enjoy this type of thing, just hearing sort of behind the scenes. So I see these two items. And so, of course, I'm working to confirm it. And when you've been doing this a long time, your main goal, good God, please don't get this wrong.
Right.
And so you're thinking of all the worst case scenarios of how could this not be true? Well, it could be that some crazy fan came up with his own PDF just as a practical joke. And, in today's world of AI.
These fans do exist. Can confirm that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people have fallen into the trap on Twitter all the time with fake Adam Schefter and fake Ian Rappaport and all that stuff. And so I'm just like, I've got to have true, rock solid confirmation. So then I talked to a higher up at Clemson who said, yeah, we got the email. The trustees got the email this morning at 9 a.m. So that's enough, to go on. But, okay, getting to the general, apart from just yesterday morning, I've thought since late August that this was coming. And in fact, I really, based on my read of the situation back in August and September, I thought something could happen in October. I really did. It didn't. And I think a part of that was the ACC expanded. And so there was a lot of red tape that just procedurally, structurally, the ACC had to go through to incorporate these 3 new members. But most important, based on my read of the situation, was to finalize the revenue shares, the school-by-school revenue shares, which also included the new incentive-based success formula or whatever that's going to start, I believe, in 2024-25. So it stands to reason that if you're Florida State or Clemson and you're, close to taking the ACC to court, it'd be in your best interest to go ahead and bake in the financial arrangements moving forward, because it's not like you're not suing the ACC and saying we're leaving effective immediately. You're gonna remain in the conference during this court battle, and so I think that was probably a part of the delay. And honestly, so many things have happened just in the last 2 or 3 months. Most recently with the college football playoff revenue distributions. I mean, I think things are going to start happening. I mean, we're used to this realignment stuff happening at kind of a glacial pace. I think that's over. I think the velocity is going to be a lot higher. And I think that as I'm explaining the delay, the fact that it came well after I expected, I think a lot of that stuff probably had a lot to do with it. The timing out of left field probably seems so from afar. And I can only speculate as to why they chose yesterday to do it. One factor is just the day before those playoff revenue distributions that was finalized. Another speculative. Nobody's told me this directly, so I'm just sort of throwing this out there. The ACC is currently not only involved in the NCAA basketball tournament, but preparing for its own hearing with Florida State in Mecklenburg County on Friday. So maybe it's like, okay, they're so bogged down with that, we can hit them with this now. But another part, or the biggest part, was Florida State tipped off the ACC. If you guys definitely remember, Florida State is bound by, I guess, probably stricter sunshine laws, public disclosure laws in the state of Florida than maybe exist in the state of South Carolina. And so they had to provide 24 hours notice of their meeting. And so that gave the ACC the tip-off and the opportunity to file its own sort of preemptive lawsuit, which is a big deal in the jurisdictional battle, that's going to be fought here starting Friday.
And that was going to be my point. Like, we've got now these separate lawsuits. Florida State's is separate from Clemson's, from whoever else might choose to file suit. Lord knows there could be others. So what we should note about this, for people listening at home wondering what is this all about, Clemson is not stating in this lawsuit that they're going to leave the ACC, but obviously we know better. This is a clear signal that they're at least kicking the tires on it. They're thinking about it. They're looking at things like this exit fee, this grant of rights, etc., wondering what does it take to get out of this. We have described, I guess, this suit by Clemson generally as exploring the validity of that exit fee, which is huge, exploring the validity of the grant of rights, which runs through, I guess, 2036. It's binding for a good long time, even, at time of recording. What is it about this suit from your perspective, from the perspective of your subscribers, from just the perspective of college football fans, that you find most interesting?
The most interesting, at the top, the most interesting part probably relates to the departure from the more buttoned up style of messaging. Before we had to sort of read between the lines with what the AD said about Clemson's future, what the president said. Well, now it's all out in the open. Now we see things like just the language they're using in a lawsuit, which is natural in a lawsuit. It's strong language. That's at the top, but sort of fundamentally, I think the most interesting and important parts of these two lawsuits is what Florida State chose to publicize in its lawsuit in December. And those matters involve the ACC's contracts with ESPN. Now, last fall, before Florida State filed its lawsuit, I was pretty aware that there are some things in these contracts. It's not just the grant of rights, is what I was told at the time, that Clemson's lawyers and Florida State's lawyers and lawyers from other schools were going to Greensboro and Charlotte to inspect. Like that's, I don't know. I don't remember when that news first sort of came out that lawyers from these schools were making fairly regular trips to Greensboro to look at these documents, but everybody assumed, oh, they're going to look at the grant of rights. But the real story, to me at least, was that they were going to look at the ACC's contracts with ESPN. Those are the parts that the ACC guards like with a pretty extraordinary secrecy, which I think that in itself is a little weird. I think.
Yeah, it's a little weird. Like, it feels like a plot out of like National Treasure, right? It's a little weird.
You can only see the contract with gloves in a very specific room with supervisors. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's really what it was. And so I don't think what I didn't expect was Florida State to unload all that in its filing. And so I remember in the day or two after Florida State's filing, I'm reading and rereading it, and I'm like, and I couldn't believe that there weren't more national media folks making a bigger deal out of two things. One, wait a minute, there's a deadline, and all this is what Florida State alleges. I guess I have to say, provide that disclaimer, but I don't think it's inaccurate. Actually, I know it's not inaccurate. The two things, wait a minute, ESPN has a February of 2025 deadline to renegotiate its deal with the ACC. That's like, at that time it was, 14 months away. Now it's 10 months away or whatever. Like, that is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Second is, wait a minute, back in 2016, when the ACC and ESPN were really pushing the schools to sign up for 20 years, ESPN only signed up for half of that? Like, wow. And I'm not saying this is the smoking gun and this is how they're going to get out of it. I don't know. I have never stepped foot in a law school,
right? But
just using common sense and some deductive reasoning. Okay, I've detected some strong legal confidence from Clemson for a while now that they are going to be able to get out of this a lot more easily than the termed state, right? Like $550 million. Oh, and then now there's this from Florida State. That's making that connection. I mean, you don't have to be, you don't have to be a master of the powers of deduction to put two and two together. And then yesterday, in Clemson's lawsuit, a lot of the ESPN ACC stuff is redacted. So, again, like, I don't know every layer of this, all the important details, but I do feel like I've followed it pretty closely over the last 6 months or so. And I don't even remember. I guess your question was what was the most interesting part of Clemson's lawsuit. And I just think the most interesting part of this whole thing that I want to learn more about is those two things that Florida State revealed, and then presumably Clemson blacked out, redacted in its filing
Dan,
yesterday.
we should sort of make it our mission to figure out more while everyone's focused on the legalese.
To go to law school?
No,
Me and
we're
you?
not doing that. We're not doing that. But
we're going to pass the bar.
We should figure out more about the security apparatus guarding these documents.
Oh, around
the national crown jewels here that are.
Do you have to be Catherine Zeta-Jones slinking over and under the laser security protection? Because I'm willing to put on that catsuit tie.
I know.
You know I've been hammering the core. Here's my question from a non-legal perspective, but a strategic question. Is there an element to this that you feel like could be, and I guess this is a more cynical way of looking at this, this is an attempt to continue or to start to flood the legal zone? That Florida State offered this lawsuit up, even though people say that the deal is sort of ironclad and there is this like crazy exit fee, and now Clemson is getting involved. Certainly Florida State and Clemson have been the two biggest winning brands in the conference lately. That, you know, Dabo's obviously a huge name. Florida State, with the success it's had recently, and a recent national champion as well, that this is more about not necessarily publicity, but sort of bogging things down within the ACC and ESPN. And certainly there are other enormous brands within the conference. North Carolina is the one that's mentioned the most. But that if you start playing in mud more and more legally, that it's eventually going to force somebody's hand because they don't want to sit in courts. They don't want to keep paying lawyers. That Clemson doesn't necessarily, or Florida State doesn't necessarily think that, like, yep, a judge is going to come in and bang his or her gavel and say, all right, everybody's free, everybody's cool. But that this is a very specific, like, wear them down strategy.
I would think that has to be a part of it, particularly given what I talked about a minute ago, that February of 25 deadline. I mean, from my understanding of negotiations between conferences and networks, and I'm not the expert on that, but 10 months out, like normally you're very much in the thick of that as a conference.
Right.
Between your conference and a network. And like, I have no idea what ESPN is going to do. But if you're ESPN, you're looking at the ACC and saying, well, you got one, now two of your members that are suing you. So if I'm Clemson and Florida State, certainly that has to be, I would consider that an advantage. You know, and the sort of the dual nature of it, the fact that the ACC is having to fight on two different fronts, I would imagine is pretty important. And the language, a lot of the language is different. I would imagine strategically. I mean, we know that Clemson and Florida State have been working together for quite a while. Now, I want to make an important distinction here because I think, you know, the immediate social media reactions yesterday were, yeah, Clemson and Florida State, package deal. They're both going to the Big Ten. I've never gotten that sense.
Right.
That they're working together on that, you know, that closely to where, you know, they're both going to theoretically get out of the deal and then go together somewhere. You know, I thought for a while, honestly, since last summer, that there's no way Florida State goes to the SEC, in part because of the way they have handled things publicly with the saber rattling and the, you know, I mean, again, not saying they're approaching it the wrong way,
right?
But if you're the SEC, you really want to bring somebody in who, at the first sign of some strife, is going to take everything public. So in that manner, and I know I'm probably coming off as a Clemson homer here, but I objectively believe it. I think Clemson has gone about it in a way that is probably more attractive to a new conference, whether it be SEC or Big Ten, because it's like, hey, we handle our business, you know, in a theoretically classy way, and we don't really air a lot of dirty laundry. But it's in terms of just bogging down, you know, that process. Yeah, that has to be a part of it. And it also should be pointed out, like, the legal confidence that I've talked about, you know, all this swagger that Florida State has shown, you know, that's one side of it. You know, like, I don't know if it's a lead pipe lock. I don't even know if Clemson believes that it's a lead pipe lock, that they're able to get out of this under the terms they want to. And it could very well be that a judge tells them both, look, guys, y'all signed up for this.
Right.
Sorry.
You signed a bad contract, and now you have to serve it out.
Yeah. And the root of this is Maryland leaving the ACC back in 12 or whenever that was. And they only ended up paying like $30 million. And every school in the ACC, including Clemson and Florida State, is like, we gotta come up with some sharper teeth to this. We gotta come up with more punitive penalties. And so, both of y'all helped come up with this idea. Not saying there aren't some great, arguments and nuances to it, given where everybody is now in 2024 compared to where things were when the grant of rights was signed. But I mean, I would think that is, we've talked about the advantages, the theoretical advantages for Clemson and Florida State. I would imagine that one of the ACC's advantages is, hey, y'all are the ones who chose to do this. So.
Right. And we're going down the line here, but okay, let's say Clemson, Florida State, let's say the ACC ends up deteriorating, disintegrating, whatever, dissolving. They need homes. You mentioned Clemson going about its business in perhaps a more attractive way. Florida State has been more public, has been more aggressive. The SEC is in South Carolina. The SEC is in Florida. The SEC is in the Eastern time zone for TV purposes, and the Big Ten is in the Eastern time zone for TV purposes. So it's not just a matter of leaving, it's figuring out who wants you, what's your plan. If Clemson and Florida State were to go to either the Big Ten or SEC, presumably, unless ESPN or Fox said, here's, $80 more million a year to cover everything. If that doesn't happen, then that means that we're having SEC and Big Ten teams voting to accept teams that would lessen their payout because they felt like long-term it was too attractive to not include Florida State or Clemson. And certainly, once again, North Carolina seems to be that big bear that hasn't been as public right now because of, academics, basketball, some football success, whatever. And neither conference, the SEC nor the ACC, to my knowledge, is in the state of North Carolina. So what's plan C? What's plan C if both of those conferences are like, hey, good for you. We're actually good right now. Is there some sort of we're just going to rebuild something new with terms we like better that have more upside? What is the plan C, or do you feel like Clemson and Florida State are acting because they have the most confident assurances from somebody?
Plan C would be the ADs, presidents, maybe even some board trustee members at both Florida State and Clemson. Better lock your doors because the pitchforks.
Right.
Your faithful.
Is there a micro ACC, right? That I think it's currently the payout says you have to have at least 8 teams to be considered to be a conference in the college football playoff. Is there a situation, because I think 7 schools before that were having the meetings that were sort of thinking about how do we get out of this, right? It's North Carolina, NC State, the Virginia schools, Clemson, Florida State, Miami. If I miss anybody, I apologize. Is there a world in which it's broken up advantagewe'ly that though 8 or 9 schools say, all right, we want this number, we feel like by getting a little bit smaller, we're confident we can get maybe a short-term deal at $44 million or something like that would be acceptable with better terms than what the ACC is giving these teams now?
Y'all, there are so many unanswerable
of course.
questions right now.
No, I just want you to speculate recklessly. That's what I want from you in this moment.
I mean, last night I read the latest article from Ross Dellinger at Yahoo, who's as plugged in as anybody on a lot of this national stuff. And I mean, nobody can predict what things are going to look like, right? I mean, we can all agree major change is upon us, but it's just almost impossible to predict what it looks like. And I think that gets to what, some of the mistaken sort of perceptions people have of these lawsuits is, oh, well, they're suing to get out of the ACC. I think it's maybe another way to view it, particularly from Clemson's point of view, is it's more accurate to say, I think, that they're going to court to try to become a free agent.
Right.
Right. Instead of all right, we're definitely leaving the ACC, even though that's certainly the way it feels. They have to get out of the ACC. But who knows what things are going to look like in 3 years. And so just to go back to plan C and what if, I have some of the same questions you guys do. Like, okay, well, if they do extricate themselves, okay, where do they end up and what does it look like? Because you're talking about diminished revenue shares and all that stuff, and the entanglements of the states of South Carolina, Florida, where you have your rival that is not a big fan of you having the same advantages that you have, let alone the rest of the conference taking a lesser share. Man, I don't have the answers to those questions, but I do believe that starting in Texas and Oklahoma, that was 21, right? That was the big one. Clemson and Florida State, I believe, that's when it really started for both of them on, okay, we're taking our heads out of the sand and we're going to start thinking proactively and aggressively. And that means a lot of legwork. I can't talk specifically. I'm not informed enough to talk specifically about what that legwork entailed. But in Clemson's president, you have Jim Clements, who is he has been through the wars, the realignment wars, because he was at West Virginia before, back when they went to the Big 12. You have Graham Neff, who is very savvy, and you have a board of trustees who I think is very smart about hiring the right people and letting them do their jobs. And so they haven't been very meddlesome, I guess. So I would find it hard to believe that Clemson specifically is taking this step if it didn't have not assurances, not a wink, wink, nod, nod, but if it didn't have a good feel for the situation. Now, could that mean the Big Ten, they have a pretty good feeling that at the very least they could end up in the Big Ten? And so maybe in their minds, again, I'm just throwing this out there. Okay, well then, in the SEC, if the Big Ten's about to pounce and grab Clemson and multiple other teams, schools perhaps, then that's when the SEC, in a territorial move that it feels like it just has to make, even with the protestations of South Carolina, Florida, and others, lesser cut, all that. It's a geographical game, folks. We simply have to lock up our borders, so to speak. I do believe, I think some others, including Andy Staples, have advanced this quite a bit, that the future of college football is certainly headed away from the market-driven type thing that made, Boston College a commodity for the ACC way back when, and Syracuse and all that. And it's headed sharply toward brands, the helmet games. We're going to have a lot more of them during the regular season than we're used to. It's hard for me to picture the spear and the tiger paw not being part of that. Now, how are we going to get there? Man, if I could tell you that, I'd be at a different place right now.
So look, you're a reputable reporter. You obviously don't want to speculate on things that you don't know. Let's do our best here to preserve that. And let's put your subscribers, let's put the Clemson fan base in the hot seat for a minute, because I know you're plugged in on that level too. There are two sides to this coin. On one side of it is college football as we have come to know and love it over many years, at least from a conference standpoint, from a geographical, tribal standpoint that we know drives this thing. That aspect of college football over the last couple of years has almost completely disintegrated. And that's a bummer. On the other, if we're realistic about where things stand right now, if you are not keeping up financially, you are in effect not competing on the national level. And so there's that push-pull between those two things that we have to grapple with as fans every single day. You are plugged into the Clemson fan base. Assuming Clemson, Florida State, North Carolina, aliens from afar overthrow the grant of rights in the ACC and suddenly this free agency situation that you described is a reality, what do Clemson people want out of this? Do they want to join the Big Ten? Do they want to join the SEC? Do they want to be independent? Like, what vibes are you picking up from your forums?
The Missouri Valley Conference, the conference of the future,
like
Ty.
What is
Plant
the end
the flag
game here?
today.
What do people want?
It's clearly either the SEC or the Big Ten. There's ongoing debate, and there has been. I would probably say the majority would prefer the SEC. I don't think there's a wrong answer.
It's just more money to
honestly.
keep up with the the in crowd.
Well, it's more money, but it's also who you are, right? Like Clemson fans. Another part of this is Clemson fans. It's not just keeping up and your survival and being in that upper tier. It's also screw the ACC. They hate the ACC. I mean, they hate it. Like, not all of them, of course, but the large majority. Man, the thought of Clemson cruising out of court with the verdict that they want, and the ACC in flames in the rearview mirror. I mean, they love that, because this goes back decades and decades back to the. I mean, first of all, it goes back to just the roots of the ACC is basketball. That's their DNA. Clemson DNA football. Clemson has been good in basketball occasionally. Clemson feels like it's been screwed by the ACC on some basketball games and in general. Also in the 80s, early 80s, Clemson gets slapped with probation. ACC has an opportunity to sort of give them a break. Well, the ACC slaps another year on, and people remember that, that's a generational DNA thing. And so, to me, or my sort of feel for it, it's not just the practical and the economical. It's also it's the tribal. Clemson has been a part of the ACC. Clemson has really enriched itself in a lot of ways from its relationship with the ACC. But bottom line, a lot of Clemson fans are just, screw that conference. I'm ready to go. And Clemson has always been known as one of the few schools in the ACC, looks like an SEC school, that acts like an SEC school. And most of that relates to football.
When is somebody going to ask Dabo about this, and what's he going to say?
They're on spring break right now. And so, let's see, they resume spring practice next week, and I don't know which day Dabo's available, but I will go ahead. I'd even put some money on this as the response. He'll say, "Oh man, I'm so focused on what I'm doing, man. Those people are way above my head, and man, I just let them make those decisions and whatever. But I will say I feel good about Clemson, and we're going to end up in a great spot. And but I don't really.
You are fluent in Dabo speak, I'm sure, at this point. So we're going to hold you to that. When we get a quote from him, we'll reach back out. But that's
was I not told though by Dabo specifically that they love that the identity of this school is the rest of y'all. They like being the underdogs on the smaller bus, right? So shouldn't Clemson just sort of steer into making less money and just grinding it out as an underdog, right? That would be Dabo's thing.
Guys, I got news for you. If Clemson does end up in the SEC, there will be plenty of opportunity for them to be the underdog. It's going to be a lot of work.
Good. Guys, Dabo must be just beside himself that money is taking over college football, right? Yeah.
Just an idea for y'all. If Dabo does give somewhat close to that response, maybe you can
side by side
do dueling side by side videos. If he doesn't, then
you could teach a graduate level course in Dabo at this point. You could get a foreign language credit to some seniors. It'd be great.
I'm in.
All right. Well, Larry Williams, thank you so much. Tell everybody where they can find you and your work and your podcast, because obviously you're on the ground there in South Carolina as everything develops.
Yeah, you can find me at tigerillustrated.com. We're part of the Rivals Network, and starting yesterday and through today and the next few days, we're going to be hitting this pretty hard, just because they're are so many layers to it. There's so much context to the overall story. And, we've been following it sort of behind the scenes for the last 6 months, just sort of filling up our notebooks with things that probably we couldn't write in the moment during some of those times that now lend a lot of context and color and understanding to what is going on. So that's the main option location for a lot of the realignment stuff. A podcast is the Clemson Dubcast, and it's on all the typical platforms. We have right now the latest interview is with Thad Turnipseed, who was a key figure in Clemson's
personnel guy
behind the scenes, the rise, with all the recruiting apparatus and the branding and social media and facilities, of course. He went to Oklahoma with Brent Venables, but just over the last year has come back to Clemson, and he's no longer involved in athletics. He's mainly in real estate now. So it's a great conversation, sort of going down memory lane. And so those are, and then Larry Williams TI, at Larry Williams TI on Twitter. I don't spend a ton of time there just because it makes my brain.
By the way, how are the spring practice vibes? How are the Clemson, like, obviously spring practice isn't over, but like, how are the vibes right now at Clemson with who's back, who's not back, changes made on the staff? What are the, I mean, everybody's optimistic in the spring, but what sense do you get for how things are looking inside right now?
The vibes are good. Like you said, they always are this time of year, but they're probably more so now, and legitimately so, because Dabo made a couple of tough decisions after the regular season, made 2 more changes and brought in Matt Luke, offensive line coach and hell of a recruiter, as he's already shown. And Chris Rumpf brought him from the NFL to coach defensive ends. The sort of big picture view of this program right now, as they're trying to get back, one of the most fascinating parts is Dabo adapting, making changes, and sort of going away from the homegrown that he really believed in and maybe went too far on in some respects. His last 4 hires, Nick Eason, back in 22, pulled him from Auburn. He was in the NFL for a long time, defensive tackles coach, hell of a recruiter. Garrett Riley, of course, was the big splash last year, and then Luke and Rumpf. I think the biggest thing that those 4 bring is just a voice, sort of more powerful voices, more confident voices, more authority, I guess you could say. And so, I just think, and then recruiting wise, Clemson continues to kill it, which that's remarkable because, for a few years there, it was like a lot of the common conversation was, Dabo is too stubborn. He's against the portal and he's against NIL. And so there's no way they're going to be able to keep up. I'm not so sure, because talent wise, they're up there, I think. And so I think if he's able to get them back to sort of that elite air, it'd be a hell of a story, because I can't think, you guys probably have a better recall than me, but can you recall a school with one coach who has gotten to the mountaintop on a sustained level, had a big dip, and then gotten back under that
sort
same
of Harbaugh.
Coach.
He didn't win the national title, but obviously he had the dip, the 2020 dip especially, that he had to restructure his contract, right? They get to a huge place where they're going to New Year's Six type games, but then they take the dip. But then obviously he, hires, new coordinators, overhauls the staff, and they certainly turn things around. Say what you will about whatever the accusations are off the field, but I guess that's the most recent one, right? Where you're just you're able to turn around the aircraft carrier.
Yeah, but were they considered a legit championship contender before? I mean,
2016 they were probably. Look, the roster wasn't there to compete with Clemson, Alabama, but they were what they would consider to be a bad spot away from beating Ohio State and, ending up in the playoff. So, no, they probably had championship caliber defenses, or largely, but no, I'm trying to think of somebody who had it, lost it, and got it back. Ty, is there anybody that comes to mind in recent, maybe on a slightly smaller level, Harbaugh. That's all I can think of.
I mean, maybe if Lincoln Riley can get his act together at USC, he's at least been in the playoff before.
Right.
But probably nothing to the extent of Dabo and Clemson. It would be a story, be a great story, frankly, of adapting with the times and kind of, figuring out a way to kind of navigate this new world order with all these extra variables. It's a bummer that we brought you on to talk about all this like seismic change, Larry, and not about the Clemson roster and getting ready for the Clemson season. Hopefully we can do that again at some point in the near future once things are a little bit more ironed out.
We'll do an emergency episode when Dabo takes a transfer, his first transfer. I will, if I'm out at the grocery store, I will break traffic laws.
The phone.
I will, that there's,
we'll do it.
Non backup quarterback transfer that had already been there. Yeah.
Larry Williams, it's always our pleasure. We will most certainly have you back on again sometime soon to talk, hopefully about some on-field stuff, if that's cool with you.
Always enjoy it. Be happy to.
All right, Dan, there you go. Larry Williams, TigerIllustrated.com, the Clemson Dubcast.
Yes.
Our foremost authority on all things Clemson football. It's always a pleasure to have Larry with us here on the podcast. It'll be interesting. These early days, I suppose we'll find out more as this lawsuit, as the Florida State lawsuit works its way through the system.
Right.
It's clear what the intention is. It's clear that eventually they want to try and be free agents and get out of this thing. But to Larry's point, where is that eventual home? Is that home in the Big Ten or SEC? Remember, there was some scuttlebutt with Florida State, even like, could Florida State go independent with the help of private equity? I mean, just all sorts of crazy ideas out there. I don't know if any of that is so much set in stone. You would hope, at least from their standpoint, that there is an unspoken understanding as for where they could go next. And it would probably be irresponsible if there weren't. We just don't know what that is yet, especially since talk of expansion, at least on the conference side, has died down a bit.
Right.
Since everything blew up last year with Oregon and Washington in the Pac-12, it seems like it has quieted for the moment, and that these are really the only two schools that are pushing forward with it. Would love to know if there have been conversations beyond what we've heard publicly.
Real quick, if you like the video, please consider subscribing to the full podcast at solidverbal.com, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. All the links are down below in the description. If you have a top 5, top 3, top 7, what are going to be the most obvious ways Clemson fans talk themselves into the Big 12? So be like, we get the Texas inroads, we get Salt Lake City, we get all these new cities. It's probably not going to happen. But also, I still think there's a universe in which the Big Ten and the SEC are we're kind of good right now. There has to be a proposition to why these schools add TV value to lessen the payouts, unless ESPN and Fox are like, oh my God, Clemson and the SEC, we have to do that. I think there is an element of, and maybe it's not with these two schools, maybe it is, where you sort of overestimate your value. I think Florida State's a more valuable commodity than Clemson. I kind of think North Carolina is more valuable than both of these schools. Maybe it's a geography thing, maybe it's a basketball thing and potentially football, and the Big Ten likes its, AAU type schools that, and I have no idea what Clemson and Florida State's AAU status is, but North Carolina has an academic reputation that Clemson and Florida State don't. I wonder if we get into the Del Curry world. You remember the string of tweets about Del Curry getting divorced?
You don't want to be out here.
Not knowing how bleak it is out there. You don't want to be Washington State out here, right? So Clemson and Florida State are definitely not Washington State or Oregon State, but there are only so many slots. There are only so many TV networks, right? There's basically 2 TV networks paying in this moment. CBS and NBC have attached themselves to the Big Ten, and the Big 12 is shared between ESPN and Fox. But we are in a moment where there are only so many dollars, there are only so many slots, and that if suddenly we have ACC teams who are very attractive, but there are only so many chairs, that it could be a situation in which the Big 12 was like, yeah, we're just going to load up. We're going to load up on inventory. Our deal, I don't think the Big 12's deal is up 14 years down the line. And so maybe there's an opportunity there to do something. But no, I don't know, man. I don't get the sense that the Big Ten wants to say, oh, we have to get into like the South Carolina market. Even going to Florida.
Yeah, if I were Clemson, I'd let Florida State leave first so that maybe you could get some of that exit fee and use it to defray the cost of your own.
Yeah.
But I think it's into the Big 12 possibility, though no one's talking about it, and though I don't think it would be where either of these schools ended up. Right. It's at least interesting to consider because of the conversation we just had about unequal revenue sharing with the playoff model. So the way that things stand, obviously the Big Ten and the SEC get more money. The ACC is next. The Big 12 is fourth on that totem pole, presumably because the ACC has had a little bit more recent success in the playoff. But if those teams end up in the Big 12, could that then help them catapult to a greater payout via the playoff? I have no idea what this looks like from the standpoint of renegotiations, from the standpoint of, network dollars and how that factors in what those numbers eventually would look like. I am interested, though, from the standpoint of there is only a certain amount of inventory that you can pay for. And on some level, unless there is some new source of advertising income, it's hard to see a world in which this is not lowering the pay for some of the other member institutions. That's probably why, at least from the Big Ten and SEC standpoint, you don't hear a whole lot of urgency, let's say, to try and make this happen sooner.
And
so it's fascinating. I don't fully know all the inner workings here. Maybe at some point we can bring someone on who does, but we're just sort of riding sidecar as all of this in the college football world is kind of burning down around us.
No, it'd be fascinating to know, and I don't know, but it'd be fascinating to know what the network view, because the networks are in charge, Fox and ESPN are in charge now, what the network view is of Clemson specifically. Do they view Clemson as a continuing national program? Clemson is national in its recent success. I don't think it's national in terms of a footprint awareness. I don't think Clemson ratings are particularly, they jump off the page or anything like that. It's not a huge school, so their like alumni footprint isn't where Florida State's, for instance, is. I think it's about 20,000 is the enrollment, somewhere in there. And it's probably up because of Clemson's recent football success. So it'd be fascinating to see where the perception is among ESPN and Fox people about Clemson as a no-brainer or long-term play, as like they're a budding star in terms of national awareness. But, you look at some of the TV ratings and some of their bigger games and national championships, and it's not where Ohio State's is. It's not where, Alabama's TV ratings grow when they don't play Clemson. That's the kind of thing that these TV networks, I think, we're going to have to wrestle with. It's just like, how do we view these places in terms of value adds for the Big Ten or SEC or even Big 12? Like, what is their value add? And if we think there's a lot of value, how do we sell the rest of the teams in a prospective new conference?
Yeah. There's a lot of meat on that bone. If any of the lawyers part of this want to come on the show and try to explain or answer some of those questions from their perspective, we'd love to have them on, provided they could translate this into layman speak, because we're not a legal show by any stretch. But a lot more to come on this front. We always appreciate Larry's insight on all things Clemson football, and certainly now with what's going on with this lawsuit. Write in solidverbal@gmail.com. As always, that is the email address where you can reach out if you've got something to say. We are as well on social media. You can reach out really on any platform and give us your thoughts on this. Does it bum you out? If you're a Clemson fan, where do you want to see him go? What do you think is realistic? All of these questions are ones that we're going to have to start, I think, asking now over the next year, 2 years, however long it takes for this thing to come to a conclusion.
By the way, to quote the great Samuel Sosa, the ACC has also been very, very good to Clemson. They had some schedules paved just incredibly so to the playoff. You know what I'm saying, Ty? That, like, what the ACC offered up in terms of opponents for Clemson, and maybe it was the fact that they didn't make a lot of money, maybe it's the fact that they're basketball schools, whatever. Clemson being in the ACC between like 2014 and 2019, that was the place to be to get yourself to 11 or 12 wins a year. And I'm not saying Dabo didn't do everything. Dabo did everything. But when you have fewer landmines, when there are fewer occasional Nate Peterman, James Conner Pitts, and more like post-good Jimbo Florida States and occasional Notre Dames, including a Brian Van Gorder Notre Dame. I don't know if they played that year. But when you have that, so like being in the ACC all those years, not great financially, competitively, pretty incredible time for Clemson.
There is this conversation, this debate.
Yeah.
Around what it means to compete nationally in this sport. And I think first and foremost, amid all of these lawsuits and talk of conference realignment and the ACC grant of rights, it gets dry. But there is this notion out there that you can only compete nationally if you are making the same as some of your counterparts.
For sure.
And I don't think that is an invalid point of view. I obviously understand that. Some of what was quoted, I don't know if it was in the lawsuit itself or in some of the articles that have been written about it, but Clemson believes that at some point the delta between what they earn annually from the ACC and their other engagements and some of their counterparts in the SEC and ACC, or SEC and Big Ten, excuse me.
Right.
So at some point that could get to about $30 million, which is a pretty big gap.
Huge.
But that being said, is that necessarily the main reason why you can't compete nationally? Is the money that big of a barrier to competing in and getting to a playoff and playing for a title? That's a lot of money. You can use that money, I'm sure, in great ways to build up your athletics program, your institution, however these guys choose to spend this money. That's a lot of potatoes, as we've said on this show. But there are other teams out there who have been competing with less money. And certainly the avenue to get to the playoff playing an ACC schedule is a lot different than playing a Big Ten or an SEC schedule or even a Big 12 schedule at this point. If you're a program like Clemson that has been at the top, that still, as Larry said, has a lot of talent on hand, there's a case to be made that you shouldn't go anywhere. If you really want to compete on the field and not so much with your bank account, then there is a case to be made that you just stay where you're at.
Right. I mean, that's obviously not the universe in which we live. I'm just saying there should be some gratitude between Clemson people and the ACC, as Larry pointed out, that, you know, there are a section of Clemson fans who there's no love lost between the program and the ACC because of, like, I don't know, bad basketball officials in the 80s, or Jim Phillips has nothing to do with that. I'm just saying, my counterpoint, my devil's advocate, was the Sammy Sosa thing, that the ACC been very, very good to Clemson. So that's all.
All right. Well, again, big thanks to Larry. Write in. Let us know your thoughts on this latest news. College football just keeps coming at us here in the offseason. We'll do our best to keep you abreast of the situation, to keep ourselves in tune with what's going on. In the meantime, for that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrand, hit subscribe, hit follow. As always, stay solid.
Peace.